You're listening to Puma Podcast.
So what we found out is that generally most Filipinos believe that the Philippines should remain neutral in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Palestine. But I think very important as well is that we've learned that there's a high demand among Filipinos that civilian casualties should be really minimized. And it's a very high number. Almost 9 in 10 Filipinos believe that any military campaign should actually ensure minimal civilian casualties. So it looks like the primary concern with this issue is that we are worried about civilian deaths, right? But it also looks like Filipinos are saying that they'd rather that we stay neutral instead of providing direct assistance to either sides.
A recent poll found that a shocking 72% of Filipinos believe that their government should stay neutral amid what rights experts have called Israel's perpetration of genocide in Gaza and its illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. In this episode, I speak to Cleve Argeulles, President and CEO of WR Numero, the research firm that conducted this survey. We get into the results, what they mean, and how we should think about the role the Philippines should play on the international stage. I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka.
So this is the issue 2, volume 2 of the Philippine Public Opinion Monitor. This is our flagship research initiative at WR Numero. And as usual, the idea with the Opinion Monitor is to look at Filipino attitudes, particularly in socio-political issues that confronts the nation. So we've interviewed 1,729 people across the country. That's between September 5 to the 23rd of this year. So this is really fresh data. And this gives us a plus or minus 2% margin of error for our national survey. So this is also very accurate as a measure of public opinion.
This latest edition of WR Numero's flagship poll is a fresh look into what Filipinos think about our politics, our leaders, and upcoming elections. But that's not all it contains.
If we zoom out and kind of like talk about global issues, just as for example, the Israel-Hamas conflict in Palestine or the 2024 US presidential elections, there's a lot to learn about what Filipinos think about these issues. So it's very useful in the sense that we have some assumptions and notions of what the regular, ordinary man and woman on the street would think about these issues, right? But there are still very quite surprising findings.
Why did you decide to include Israel's war on Gaza, on other occupied Palestine territories in this survey?
There are certain things that we want to understand. We want to understand what they think the Philippine government should do as a response, because that's one of kind of like the pragmatic side into doing this public opinion research, right? How to influence the government to align with what the population would want to see, right? And also we want to understand how they see the situation in Palestine in terms of the alarming numbers of civilian deaths, right? As someone who's gone through, for example, the war on drugs and other similar violent episodes as well, we want to understand whether that's also affecting, for example, how Filipinos would see when they're not directly involved, right?
Contrary to the 72% who said the Philippines should remain neutral, 16% said the Philippines should diplomatically condemn Israel's actions, while the remaining 12% said we should use diplomacy to support Israel's military campaign. And that's so interesting, that word neutral. Like, can you shed any more light on how you presented that word neutral to them?
So the way that we've phrased questions are like this. So, for example, the first question has something to do with it's in the news, right, that war in Palestine is getting more intense, and the war in Palestine is between Hamas and Israel, right? And in terms of diplomacy, what do you think the Philippines should do? And one of the options, and that's the top option that Filipinos selected, that's 72%, maging neutral dapat ang Pilipinas, for the Philippines to stay neutral. So we want the options really to convey the weight of the options that they also are about to choose. So, for example, the other option is use diplomatic channels to condemn the continuous attacks by Israel on Palestine that has already resulted to 40,000 civilian deaths in Gaza. So we want them to be able to kind of like imagine the gravity and the weight of choosing this position. So with that said, even though I have a personal position in this, I also do not take it lightly that our respondents selected neutral after hearing all of these options, right? So to me, because at the face, kind of like at the surface level, you could say, oh, Filipinos are kind of like very insular and they don't want to think about these issues, right? But I'd also like to think that the way that we've phrased the questions and the way that they have been read, the options, and we record all of our interviews, right? So that means that our interviewers on the ground are required to read each and every word of the questions and the options, right?
Essentially, what Cleve is saying is that every effort was made to ensure that respondents had a clear idea of what was happening on the ground. And a vast majority still said we should be neutral.
I don't think they've taken it lightly. I think they've considered after hearing that that this is what they think is the best position that the Philippines should take. Whether that's the correct one or not, then I think my response to that always is that it's a good thing that we're measuring this, because now it can be the center of public conversations, and we can talk about why this is probably not the ideal response for a country like ours.
We get into more survey findings after a quick break. Here's what else Filipinos think about Israel and Palestine. 50% of respondents said the Philippine government should not send direct aid to either side. Another 27% said the Philippines should send aid to Gazans and condemn Israel's ongoing bombardment of the city. The remaining 23% support Israel's campaign to neutralize Hamas, despite the civilian cost.
So I guess the last two things I would want to say on this is that it sounds like, of course, 72% of Filipinos wanting to be neutral. Okay, I've already explained how nuanced you could interpret that, right? But there's also, for example, 27% of Filipinos saying that we should provide direct help to civilians in Gaza and continue to condemn Israel for its attacks on Palestine. And again, it looks like 27%. Oh, that's small. That's not the majority. But we're talking about 110 million Filipinos. And that's millions and millions of Filipinos demanding that. So I think also for like advocates and activists, right, there's a sizable number of people, I think, that also wants to be engaged, right, on this particular issue, and probably would be very important to be mobilized, right, to advocate for the people of Palestine and those who are experiencing the war in Gaza. And the last thing, I think also that 86% of Filipinos saying that civilian death should be minimized in all kinds of like wars, right, in all kinds of armed conflict. To me, when you pair it with the question on neutrality, on diplomacy, I may not be a fan of this particular position of the Philippines, but historically also, we have always been on that side, that we tend to be, on issues that wouldn't really directly matter or affect our interests. Usually we take political neutrality, right? But there's a deep tradition of humanitarianism among our diplomats and among our people, apparently, as well, right? That we do care when humanitarian principles, such as, for example, minimizing civilian deaths, are violated.
The idea that the Philippines should stay out of international affairs was a pervasive one when Rodrigo Duterte was president, mostly because he insisted that other countries and international bodies should stay out of our affairs, even when they potentially violated international law. He withdrew from the International Criminal Court, condemned the United Nations, and undermined The Hague. For a time, it seemed like his successor, President Marcos, was happy to follow in his footsteps, but he's done plenty over the years to prove otherwise. The Philippines is currently vying for a seat on the United Nations Security Council. If successful, that would mean that from 2027 to 2028, we will play a major role in managing conflicts abroad. But whether we get that seat or not, political scientist Cleve Argeulles argues that our voice has always mattered on the international stage.
I've always been of the opinion that we tend to think that we have this assumption that what we think about international issues wouldn't matter because we're a small country, quote unquote, anyway, and our opinions wouldn't really matter. But we want to get out of that assumption and actually challenge that assumption by centering the idea that first, it's not true that we're a small country. We're a very big country, right? And among the democracies around the world, I think we are part of the 10 biggest democracies across the world, for example, right?
We're the 6th largest democracy in the world, larger than Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and South Korea, to name a few.
So that means that what Filipinos think, just by population alone, is actually very important because we are a big part of the world population.
This is part 1 of a series we're devoting to WR Numero's most recent findings on Philippine public opinion. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts if you'd like to hear the next one. This was a conversation packed full of insight, but that one data point about us being one of the world's largest democracies hasn't left my mind since I heard it. How did it make you feel? Did it change how you view our country, our influence, and any responsibility we might have to the rest of the world? Let us know in the comments or on social media, and tell a friend who might want to hear this episode as well. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. Thanks for listening.